بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين اللهم حبب إلينا من إيمان وزينه في قلوبنا وكره إلينا الكفر والفسوق والعصيان اللهم واجعلنا من الراشدين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu to you all, and welcome to this next lesson in our course Tajweed Made Easy. This is our sixth lesson today, and I hope that inshallah ta'ala you've been able to follow with us and continue with us throughout this journey, which inshallah we're going through. Before we start on our lesson today, our usual reminder that we are starting with the name and the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to renew our intentions of why we are here, and if we can, to be also in a state of wudu. It will be advisable if you have your workbooks ready to hand, to have those to hand from the start. And also there will be some practical elements for today. So if you do have a mushaf, a copy of the Quran to hand, then it would be good to get a copy just so that you can use that for reference. And if not, all of the information should be on the screen if that's not possible. So inshallah, bismillah, alhamdulillah, we'll make a start for today. So as with previous lessons, inshallah, we'll start today with the hadith and then get on to the content of the lesson. And the hadith which we are going to go through, you can see on the screen here. Firstly, we'll go through the hadith in Arabic, and then we'll go through the hadith in English, and then just go through a few of the ideas and concepts that we can get to then implement for ourselves. So firstly in Arabic, قال عبد الله بن عمرو بن العاص قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقال لصاحب القرآن اقرأ وارتقي ورتل كما كنت ترتل في الدنيا فإن منزلتك عند آخر آية تقرأها. يقال لصاحب القرآن اقرأ وارتقي ورتل كما كنت ترتل في الدنيا فإن منزلتك عند آخر آية تقرأها. So it is narrated that Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "It will be said to the companion of the Quran, recite and ascend as you recited in the world. Verily, your rank is determined by the last verse you recite. It will be said to the companion of the Quran, recite and ascend as you recited in the world. Verily, your rank is determined by the last verse you recite." So alhamdulillah, we've covered the hadith that inshallah we'll be going through today. It's an interaction which will happen inshallah ta'ala in paradise, in Al-Jannah. And we're given a glimpse of this interaction which is going to take place. Before we go on to the hadith, I think it's worth just mentioning the phrase which we are all quite used to hearing, the phrase of as-siratul mustaqim. A phrase which we say quite often during our salawat and throughout our day because it's contained within Surah Al-Fatiha when we say to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our dua, Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. And we say to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, guide us to as-sirat al-mustaqim. Now the phrase as-sirat al-mustaqim, it is translated as the straight path. And for ourselves as Muslims, we see that as a guide for us and kind of encouraging us towards a goal at the end. So imagery wise, we can see a straight path and we're wanting guidance along that straight path to be able to get to a goal, which is Al-Jannah. When you look at the phrase of as-sirat al-mustaqim, and we take the word as-sirat or siratun in isolation, the word sirat means a path. Whereas even if it is a path, the word as-sirat denotes to us that it is a straight path within itself. Not only is it a straight path, but it is a wide path, an inviting path. So even the word as-sirat by itself gives us an imagery or an idea that it's a straight path leading towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then we have the adjective after, which says al-mustaqim or mustaqim by itself. And we know that to be translated as the word which means straight. So now there's an extra level which is being added to this straight path, because as-sirat by itself means straight path, and now we've got an extra level with the word mustaqim being added to it too. We know the word mustaqim because we have similar words which are also coming from the same root, such as qiyam or istiqama, which means to stand up straight. So with the word as-sirat, we've got this kind of horizontal traveling or traversing, which we are doing along the path. And then with the word mustaqim, we've got this now vertical idea within our minds that not only are we going along a path, but we've also got this vertical ascension across or along as-sirat al-mustaqim. So it's that kind of imagery that we are asking for in our dua in Surah Al-Fatiha when we say, Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. Not only are we wanting to go along the path, but we're also wanting to go higher and ascending towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What other evidence do we have of this ascension? The Quran itself is described as Hablullah al-Mamdud min as-sama'i ila al-ard, a strong rope which extends from the skies towards the earth. So again, we've got this idea of ascension. And now not only are we going along the road, but we have an ala, a material with us, which is the Quran, which is going to take us, if we hold on to it with this rope, from the earth which we are on and traverse vertically towards the sky by being companions and being connected to the Quran. So it's an imagery which I want us just to keep in our minds, because that's exactly the interaction now which is happening in Al-Jannah. So we'll again just link back to the hadith which we were going through. As we said, it's an interaction within Al-Jannah which is going to be taking place. The first part, it says, it will be said to Sahib al-Quran, to the companion of the Quran. So what do we take from that phrase, Sahib al-Quran? It's a person who reads the Quran. It's a person who knows how to read the Quran. It's a person who reads the understanding and translations of the Quran, but then more importantly, along with that, takes the meanings and the lessons from the Quran and then implements them within their lives. So if you look at any kind of sahib, any kind of companion that you would have, what can you do with that companion? You would trust in them. You would kind of give them as much as you could to the extent that you could. And that is the idea that we are wanting to have in our minds, not only to another person, but now with connection to the Quran. So not only are we reading it, but understanding its meanings and really like implementing those things, and that will allow us to become what is called here a sahib, a companion of the Quran. So it'll be said to this companion of the Quran, firstly, recite. So alhamdulillah, with this course, we are getting to a stage where we are becoming those type of people who can recite the Quran. So inshallah, this will be a big tick in our favor. Iqra, recite. But not only recite, it will be said to them, ascend. And again, we've got this imagery now of going up and higher through Al-Jannah, which we know Al-Jannah does have darajat. It does have levels of which we are aspiring to attain to a higher level. So this person, the sahib of the Quran, is told recite. And as they are reciting, depending on their connection with the Quran, they will be physically ascending through Al-Jannah, and determined by how strong their connection was with the Quran, it will determine their rank in Al-Jannah. So the stronger a person links to the Quran, which is this strong rope which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us from the skies themselves towards the earth, and as much as we hold on to wanting to be guided to as-sirat al-mustaqim, this straight path, that will determine inshallah ta'ala our level in Al-Jannah. With regards to the levels in Al-Jannah, we always ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for Al-Jannah, because that is where we want our final abode to be. But do we just ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for Al-Jannah? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that it's not enough for you just to ask for Al-Jannah. When you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ask for the best of Al-Jannah. So when you ask for Al-Firdaus, Jannatul Firdaus, which we know is the highest, and A'la al-Makan, the highest level that one can get to within Al-Jannah. So with this hadith, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us companions of the Quran. We ask Him to make us of those who will be said to them, recite and ascend as we recited in this world. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us companions and to give us the rank of Jannatul Firdaus for ourselves and our families. So with this concept of reciting and ascending, we go on to our class for today, lesson 6, which is called the rules of lengthening. So inshallah, have your workbooks to hand. And inshallah, we'll start with the content for today. Bismillah, alhamdulillah. So as we've said, we've got the rules of lengthening. So before we start, it would be ideal to go through some terminology, just as we've done previously. So you've got here on the screen our first word for today. The first word is the word madda. Madda. The word madda is a verb, a doing word, and it means to lengthen or to increase. And the phrase is used when one is extending one's hand to shake another person's hand, and you would say madda yadahu, he extended his hand, and it gives you that kind of concept in your mind of something from a still position becoming something even more. So again, that's the verb that we've got, madda, to lengthen. We go from our verb and we go now onto a noun. So we go from madda to the word maddun with a tanween at the end. So a maddun or a mad is now a noun, and it is translated as a lengthening. A lengthening, and that is the singular. And then if we want to change maddun, which is a singular, to plural, we get the word mudud. Mudud. So we go from mad, singular, lengthening, to mudud, lengthenings in plural. And that's the terminology that we'll use for today. When we think about mudud as in lengthenings, there's another phrase which is commonly used, and that is the phrase huruf ul-mad. Huruf ul-mad. And that can be described as lengthening sounds. So we've heard the word huruf before, and we've heard it when describing the letters of the alphabet. And we said the word harf means letter, and the word huruf means letters. But the word harf, or the plural huruf, is actually an interchangeable word. Yes, it does mean letter and letters, but it also means a multitude of different things. And in this case, we're using it to be described as the sounds which are being lengthened. So for huruf al-mad, we'll translate it as the lengthening sounds. So what are the lengthening sounds? We have seen them previously when we went through our origins of the letters. We said there are two main types of makharij. We said there are specific and non-specific types. For our non-specific types, we said there's one main point of origin, which is a non-specific point of origin, a makhraj muqaddar, and that was al-jawf. Al-jawf was described as the space within the mouth and the throat, and we said that because it's a non-specific point of origin, not a letter doesn't come from those points, but instead sounds come from those points. And there are three sounds which come from al-jawf, and those are the three sounds which you can see here on the screen. So we've previously mentioned our three vowels which we've got in Arabic, our fatha, our dhamma, and our kasra. So we said that when you take each of those vowels in unison, if they are linked with a specific letter, so a fatha with an alif, a dhamma with a waw, or a kasra with a ya, that it takes those single vowels, which are only one length long, to now two lengths. So we go from with the fatha, which would be a, we go to two lengths, which would be from u to u, and from e to e. So those are our basic three lengthening sounds: a fatha with an alif, a dhamma with a waw, and a kasra with a ya. And because we've got that construction together, the sounds don't stay as a single length, but they are taken to two lengths long. This circle, which you can see here, this dotted circle, that denotes that any letter could be preceding these alifs, waws, and ya. So it could be any letter which comes preceding, but as long as it has the specific vowel on that letter, that will allow this construction to take place. So these are our three lengthening sounds, our three huruful mad, which are all lengthened to 2 lengths long. Just to repeat again, we've previously said, how do you determine a length? You start with a single length, for example, a fatha, and you say a. And if you want to take that to 2 lengths, rather than counting on fingers or something different, which is quite a subjective way to count, instead you just hear the singular and you just double the length of the sound, and that will allow you to get to 2 lengths. So we go from a to a, a, a. Perfect. So that's kind of a practice for us to know how long to make these 2 lengths. So these are our 3 huruful mad, our 3 lengthening sounds. So we've got some examples now of lengthening sounds. So what we're saying, we're looking for a fatha and an alif, and that would give us an example of a harf mad. So here we've got a fatha, and straight after it, we've got this alif. So what does that show us? We've got an example of a harf mad, and it takes this sound not only to 1 length, but to 2 lengths. And it's irrelevant which letter is at the beginning here for now. It all just matters about the fact that there's a fatha there and there's an alif after. So if we were just reciting it to 1 length, we'd say qa. And now that we know it's a harf mad, it's a lengthening sound, we go to qa. And we have the word qala, qala, qala. So that's lengthened to 2 lengths long. Similar thing again, this time we've got a dhamma, and exactly after it, directly after, we've got a waw. So again, another example of a harf mad. We take it from qu to qu, and we say yaqulu, yaqulu, yaqulu. So we've taken that sound from 1 length to 2 lengths long. And again, a kasra directly preceding a ya. So we've got another example of a harf mad. So we take this from qi to qi, and the word qila, qila, qila. So again, it just so happens that we've got a qaf in all of these examples, just to make it easier to see. But it could be any letter which we are elongating, or that could have the original vowel on. And we've got here examples of the fatha and the alif, the dhamma and the waw, and the kasra and the ya. And these are our base levels of lengthening sounds. So now when we talk about mudud, we described, or we translated mudud as lengthening sounds, but it may get a bit confusing now as we go through the lesson. So instead of calling them lengthening sounds, we're going to just flip and call them mudud, just so that we're not getting confused between the two, even though in essence they mean the same thing. So with regards to mudud now, there are 2 different types of mudud. On the first hand, you've got mudud al-asliya, mudud al-asliya, and that's described as foundational mudud, foundational mudud. And the concept which is given is the trunk of a tree. The trunk of a tree, it says asl, it's its foundation, it's what's keeping it strong, and nothing can change that foundation because it's solid within the ground. And because of that reason, the mudud al-asliya, these foundational mudud, only stay at 2 lengths long. They only stay at 2 lengths, similar to as we saw the examples on the previous page. Whereas on the flip side, we have the second type of mudud, which is mudud al-far'iyya, mudud al-far'iyya. So again, to go on to our concept, we had the trunk, but now we've got different furu, different branches that come from that original trunk. And those branches can move, and they are in isolation. So with that in mind, mudud al-far'iyya, the now supplemental mudud, they can stay as 2 lengths, or they can be more than 2 lengths. So mudud al-asliya, the trunk in the middle, the foundational mudud, are only 2 lengths. Mudud al-far'iyya, supplemental to what was said before, could be 2 lengths or more. So it's 2 plus lengths for mudud al-far'iyya. So inshallah, we'll be going through in detail what comes under these two different types of al-mudud. And for those that have the workbook, you'll see a flow chart which will show mudud al-asliya and mudud al-far'iyya, and then we'll go through each of them in isolation. So we've said that some mudud are asliya, some mudud are far'iyya, and we said that the foundational mudud are two lengths, whereas some other ones, these supplemental mudud, they increase, they could stay as two, or they could increase to more than two. So I guess the question needs to be asked before we go on to describing things and explaining, why would something become more than two? And there are two main reasons why a mudud would move from al-asliya to al-far'iyya, and in doing so, potentially move to more than two lengths long. And those are the two reasons shown here on the screen. So why would a mad increase? Two reasons, either a hamza or a sukoon. So as we'll be going through, sometimes a hamza will cause a mad to increase in length, and sometimes a sukoon will cause a mad to increase in length. And obviously, if we're having an increase in mad, this will only be relating to the supplemental mudud, the mudud al-far'iyya, which go above two lengths and are described as the branches which come off the trunk. So that's just getting our minds used to being aware of when we do have a hamza or a sukoon. So with regards to mudud, there are 10 different types of mudud, 10 different mudud, which we are going to, inshallah, be going through. Of those 10 mudud, 4 of them are foundational. So 4 of the 10 come under mudud al-asliya, mudud al-asliya. Because they are mudud al-asliya, how long are they going to be? How long are these mudud al-asliya going to be? Because they are foundational, all of them are going to be to two lengths long. So again, all of the ones that we're going to be seeing are in reference to that trunk of the tree. Nothing's going to change them. Regardless of what's happening, they're going to stay as two lengths. So inshallah ta'ala, we'll go through now those 10 different mudud and just see examples of all of them in action. So the first type of mad which we have within now the foundational mudud, the mudud al-asliya, is called the mad al-tabi'i. Al-mad al-tabi'i. And al-tabi'i means natural. Al-tabi'i means natural. We said before that a lengthening sound or a mad can change if there is an effect of a hamza or a sukoon. So this is saying the exact opposite of that. So if there's no sukoon, no hamza to have an effect and to allow that increase, then it will remain as a mad at-tabi'i. It may sound quite confusing, but the mad at-tabi'i is the most common mad which you'll see throughout the Quran. And when we go through our practice, you'll see that in action as well. And that's why it's called natural, because it's so naturally occurring. It's classified as al-mad al-tabi'i. So let's see some examples now of mad al-tabi'i. So we'll start from the right-hand side. Again, when we're looking for al-mudud, what is our baseline that we need to look for? We need to look for our lengthening sounds, so our fatha and our alif, dhamma and waw, kasra and ya. And whenever we've got those foundational, whenever we've got those lengthening sounds, those huruf al-mad, that's when our cogs start turning and we need to determine what type of mad we've got. So if we see this word on the right-hand side first, we've identified we've got a fatha and we've identified that we have a alif after it as well. So what do? We look for, with mad al-tabi'i, is there any effect of any sukoon or any hamza, either before or after this construction of the harf mad, of the lengthening sound? Absolutely not. Before it we've got a kaf, after it we've got a noon, and there's a fatha on that noon. So there's no effect of a hamza or a sukoon. So that means it's an example of mad al-tabi'i, and most importantly, it stays as two lengths, just as our normal lengthening sounds would. So we say kana, kana, kana. So again, there's no effect of a hamza or a sukoon. So there's no reason for us to change this mad from two lengths to anything else. So it stays as its original two lengths. Let's see another example, the one in the middle. We have now a dhamma, and directly after we've got a waw. So again, it doesn't matter which letter the dhamma is on. What we're looking for, is there any effect of a hamza or a sukoon? Absolutely not. We've got a ta before, fa, and a dhamma after. Absolutely no effect of a sukoon or a hamza. So this stays exactly as two lengths. As an example of mad al-tabi'i, and we say yatufu, yatufu, yatufu. Perfect. So quite a simple one to understand, because there's nothing really changing from what we would expect from what we said previously. Again, last example, we have a kasra and we have a ya. Again, same kind of thing. We're looking for, is there a hamza there? Is there a sukoon to potentially change things? Again, absolutely no effect of that. It's a ha and a lam with a fatha on the end. So this stays as two lengths, and it's an example of mad al-tabi'i. And we say wahila, wahila, wahila. So again, simple examples, mad al-tabi'i, all staying to two lengths long. Our first example of a mad al-asli. We'll go on to the next page and just see some examples of mad al-tabi'i now in a different construction. So we've got the two words here. The first ayah of Surah Al-Duha. So again, whenever thinking about mudud, you first want to find an example of a lengthening sound. So your fatha, your alif, your dhamma, waw, and your kasra, ya. So in this example here, we have an example of a fatha and an alif. As we've seen previously, an alif can be written with the straight pedestal, as we've seen previously, or it can be classed as a alif maksura. Alif maksura is classed as a broken alif, and it takes on the shape very similar to a ya, as you can see here, but it's still an example of a fatha and an alif. So again, what do? We look before, we look after. This comes at the end of an ayah, so there's nothing to look at after. No effect of a sukoon, no effect of a hamza. It stays as two lengths. It's an example of mad al-tabi'i, and we say wad-duha, 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 wad-duha. So again, the ha at the end with the fatha and the alif staying as two lengths long. The next one we've got is the first ayah of Surah Yasin. Now we know Surah Yasin starts with the construction of the letter ya by itself and the sin with this sign on top, which we've not seen yet, but we'll come to that later. But we're just more focused now on the ya. The ya by itself does have a standing alif if you were to look in the mushaf. So with the fatha and the alif that the ya would have, it is an example of another mad al-tabi'i. So this would be lengthened to two lengths long. Again, no effect of a sukoon or a hamza. And it's just to remind us that these beginning of surah, which have the huruf al-muqatta'at, these separated letters, such as your hamim, your yasin, taha, alif lam ra, the ra and alif lam ra, all of them have a fatha and a alif, which extend them to two lengths long. There's no effect of a sukoon or a hamza on any of them. So all of them are examples of mad al-tabi'i. So with the ya of Yasin, similarly, it would be elongated to two lengths long as an example of mad al-tabi'i. And you'd say Yasin, Yasin. And again, we'll come on to what the mad of the letter sin is. But for now, the ya on Yasin and the other examples that we went through are examples of mad al-tabi'i. So mad al-tabi'i is the first mad that we've gone through. It comes under the category of mudud al-asliya, these foundational mudud. Because they are foundational, they're only lengthened to two lengths long. Mad al-tabi'i is a naturally occurring mad, and the definition which is given is that with this mad, there's no effect on the lengthening sound of a hamza or a sukun, which allows this lengthening sound to stay as two and to be an example of mad al-tabi'i. So we'll now go on to our second mad, which is mad al-badal. Mad al-badal, again, we're going through our mudud al-asliya. So it's these foundational lengthening sounds, these foundational mudud. Al-badal means change, change. We'll go through what that change exactly means, but the descriptive definition which is given of al-badal is every elongated hamza. Kullu hamzin mamdud. Every elongated hamza. So before we said when we're looking for what example of a mad we have, we're looking for our construction of our fatha alif, dhamma waw, kasra ya. And we said previously with mad al-tabi'i and the other examples which we gave previously, it didn't matter which letter was being elongated. All we needed was the construction of either of those three. With mad al-badal, one could say it's a specific type of mad al-tabi'i, because yes, we have the construction of the lengthening sound, but the actual letter which is being elongated has to be a hamza. So you can see on all of these sounds that we've got here, the actual letter which is being elongated is a hamza. So we've got the three sounds, a, u, e, again, all to 2 lengths long. Where does this change come from is our next question. In the words which have these three constructions, the a, u, e, which we've seen on the screen here, the original would have been for there to be 2 hamzas together, as in to say a, u, e. However, to allow the ease of recitation, there was a change to that second hamza called tasheel, a softening or easing of the sound. And that allowed a change to take place where it wasn't 2 hamzas which are being said, but instead an example of one of the lengthening sounds, again, to allow ease of recitation. So that's where the concept of changing comes in. But for us, all we want to be concentrating on is finding examples of these elongated hamzas. So we have our construction of our harf mad, but the actual letter which is being elongated is a hamza. So very similar to mad al-tabi'i. Question is again, why is this single letter isolated from the rest of the letters with its own mad? The answer is the Quran in its transmission towards us has been transmitted towards us in a numerous amount of different ways, all with their concise sanad, their link, which has been authenticated back to the Prophet ﷺ. But there are slight variations in certain ways of recitation, and this is one of the ways in which the recitation can change. So in some riwayat, in some ways that the Quran has been transmitted towards us today, the mad of al-badal sometimes can come under the supplemental mudud al-far'iyya and be elongated to more than 2 lengths. But in the Quran that we are teaching, the course that we're teaching here, which is through the riwayah of Hafs an Asim by the tariqah, by the way of Ash-Shatibi, mad al-badal, despite the fact that we're classifying it differently, only stays still as 2 lengths, just as we had with mad al-tabi'i. But that's just to understand why there's this differentiation and why mad al-badal with the specific letter of hamza is differentiated and classified differently from mad al-tabi'i. So let's see examples of mad al-badal where we have an elongated hamza. So again, not only are we wanting to look for our harf mad, our fatha and our alif, now as well as that, the actual letter which has the vowel on needs to be a hamza for it to become mad al-badal. So we have the first word here. We've got our construction that we want to. So firstly, it stays as 2 lengths long in the riwayah which we are teaching and learning. And that means that it's an example of mad al-badal. So what do we say? We say Adama, Adama, Adama. So again, the hamza itself is being elongated. Again, a similar thing. We've got our fatha, our kasra, and our ya, and the actual letter which is being elongated again is a hamza. So what is this an example of? It's an example of mad al-badal, a foundational mad, and it stays as two lengths long, and we say the word imanan, imanan, imanan. Okay, so again, very similar to mad al-tabi'i, but the actual letter which is being elongated is a hamza. Again, last example, we have a hamza. The hamza has a waw, and the letter directly after is a waw. So a hamza with a dhamma and a waw directly after has this construction which we are wanting to find for an example of mad al-badal, elongated still to two lengths long, and we say وَأُوذُوا وَأُوذُوا وَأُوذُوا. Okay, so an example now of mad al-badal which we've seen, kullu hamzin mamdud, every elongated hamza, it still stays as two lengths long, and we've gone through the reason of why this letter is differentiated and classified differently from the rest. Despite that, the only thing which we need to keep in our mind that it's classified differently as mad al-badal rather than being a example of mad al-tabi'i. Again, just as a matter of fact to say, on the last word, we have a dhamma and a waw, another construction. So you can see mad al-tabi'i here, which you've just seen as our first example, and mad al-badal now combined within one word. So you've got mad al-badal and mad al-tabi'i here, just for a matter of saying that sometimes you can have even more than one mad combined within one word. So that was mad al-badal. As we said, it means change. Descriptively, it's described as kullu hamzin mamdud, every elongated hamza. We want our lengthening sound, one of the three, but the actual letter which is being elongated should be hamza itself. Despite that, the fact that it's hamza itself which is being elongated, there's no change to the length, and it still stays as two lengths long, and it is our second example of a mad al-asli, our foundational mudud, which we are going through. So we'll move from mad al-badal to our next type of mad. Before that though, we will have a short practice. So if you have your mushaf to hand, or instead you can just use the content on the screen here. We've got the first 4 ayat of Surah Al-Duha. I'm just going to set a 2-minute timer. And what I'd like us all to do is what is written at the bottom of the screen here. I would like us to find examples of mad al-tabi'i, as we said, the naturally occurring mad, where there's no effect of sukoon or a hamza, and mad al-badal, which is an elongated hamza. I would like us just to go through these 4 ayat and just to pick out which examples we have of these two mudud. So I'll give us 2 minutes. So inshallah, start your work on that and we'll catch up in a couple of minutes. Inshallah, 1 minute left. Khair. So we'll start going through the answers on that. A couple of minutes, you may have only got through a few ayat, but it just gives a chance for us to see the rules which we've gone through in action. So we'll start with Mad al-Tabi'i, which we've highlighted here in yellow. What are we looking for? We're looking for one of those lengthening sounds, those huruf al-Mad, where there's no effect of a sukun or a hamza. So we've done the first ayah of Wadduha already. So you can see this harf mad here. And that's an example of mad al-tabi'i. So again, elongated to 2 lengths long. Nothing else in this ayah. We move on to the next. We're trying to find an example of a harf mad. Again, we have another one here, our fatha and alif on the word idha. Again, we look before and after, no effect of a sukun, no effect of a hamza. So this is an example of mad al-tabi'i. Again, moving on, we have another fatha and alif. Again, just as we had with the first ayah, an example of mad al-tabi'i on an alif maksura this time. So you can see just within 2 ayat, we've picked out 3 mudud al-tabi'i. So you can see how naturally occurring it is. Let's carry on to the next ayah. Again, another fatha and alif, no effect of a sukun or a hamza. Another example there, mad al-tabi'i, carrying on. Next ma, we've got another mad al-tabi'i. And similar to the last word, again, another fatha and alif. Let's just continue the full ayat with our mudud al-tabi'i, see if we can find any more. وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. So again, the last word, we've got al-ula, we've got a fatha and alif, despite the fact that it's on a alif maksura, an example of mad al-tabi'i. So you can see just from the fact that within these 4 ayat, we've had numerous examples of the mad al-tabi'i, and again, it all links into the fact that this is this naturally occurring mad, which we can see very often within the Quran. So again, now we'll go through these ayat and see examples of mad al-badal. So what we're looking for, we're looking for one of those huruf al-mad, those lengthening sounds, where the actual letter which is being elongated should be a hamza. So again, we go through وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. No examples there, but then in the last ayah, we have وَلَلْآخِرَةُ. Again, we have a fatha and a alif, and the actual letter which is being elongated is a hamza. So this is an example of mad al-badal, where it's actually the hamza, which is the construction of the harf mad, the lengthening sound. So it stays as 2 lengths long. وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. So again, a dhamma this time on the hamza. We have the waw after. Another example of mad al-badal. So again, it stays as 2 lengths long and is an example for us to see. So you can see not as commonly occurring as mad al-tabi'i, but we can still see examples of it as we're reciting through. Yes, they both stay to 2 lengths long, but just to differentiate them because of other riwayat, other ways of reciting, that's why they are differentiated differently. So inshallah, when you are reciting, just be a bit more aware of it. And now that we're going through the different types of mudud, it'll allow you to know how long to recite these things, and more importantly, be consistent between all of the examples and all of the ayat which we are reciting. So with that little short practice which we've had, we'll now go on to our 3rd type of mad. And this mad is called mad al-iwad. Mad al-iwad. And al-iwad or ta'weed means substitution or changing. It only occurs when we are ending on a fatha alif. Fatha tanween, excuse me. It only occurs when ending on a fatha tanween. So we've seen tanween before, this doubling of a vowel, and it gives us this n sound. And if it's with a fatha tanween, it gives us the sound an. So you can see this fatha tanween, the two vowels on top of each other, which gives us the sound an. So mad al-iwad, only occurs when ending on a fatha tanween. So when we're talking about substitution or changing, what exactly is it that we are changing? So we said it only occurs on a word which has fatha tanween at the end. So regardless of the word that you're reading, if you find an example of mad al-iwad, firstly what you'd see is the last letter in that word would have a fatha tanween, and you'd see the alif as part of that construction. This circled letter, this dotted letter, could be any letter which has the fatha tanween on. What are we doing with mad al-iwad? We are substituting this fatha tanween, which we have at the end of our word, and we're substituting it with a lengthening sound. And which lengthening sound are we substituting it with? We're substituting it with our fatha and our alif. So again, we've got to a construction now which we're used to seeing, which is our normal lengthening sound. And because it's our normal lengthening sound, it would be elongated to 2 lengths long. So mad al-iwad is a substitution when you are ending on a fatha tanween, a substitution of that fatha tanween or changing it into a simple lengthening sound, a fatha and an alif, and that allows you to put mad al-iwad into place. You could potentially see it as just removing one of the vowels from the fatha tanween, and that would get you the same construction. So it is called mad al-iwad, which is called substitution. So to link with the name of the mad, it would be a complete change from one to another. But if it's easier when you are reciting just to assume one of them is being removed, that would also get you to the same lengthening sound at the end. So this is mad al-iwad. We are stopping on a word with fatha tanween and changing that into a lengthening sound. So let's see that in practice now. We've got the phrase here, عذابا أليما, عذابا أليما. And we are deciding to stop at the end of this word, denoted by this shape which we have here. So what do we see? On the last word, we have a meme. The meme has a fatha tanween on it, which we would normally say aliman, and we'd hear the N sound of the fatha tanween. But now if we are wanting to stop on that word, we have to put mad al-iwad into practice. And what do? We substitute this fatha tanween and we substitute it into a fatha and alif, and in doing so we get our lengthening sound, and by doing so it is elongated to 2 lengths long. So we go from عذابا أليما to عذابا أليما, عذابا أليما, عذابا أليما. So again, we've gone from a fatha tanween to a simple lengthening sound of a fatha and an alif, and that allows it to be elongated to 2 lengths long. Let's see another example. We've got the phrase فيها أبدا, فيها أبدا. So again, if we're reciting that phrase normally, you'd hear the N sound of the fatha tanween at the end. But if we're choosing to stop there, what are we going to do? We're going to substitute this fatha tanween, which we have at the end on the dal. We're going to substitute it with our normal lengthening sound, our fatha and our alif, and we go to فيها أبدا, فيها أبدا, فيها أبدا. Perfect. So you can see where this substitution is coming in. It's substituting this fatha tanween into a single fatha and alif, and that allows mad al-iwad to take place. As we said, it's only when stopping, it's only on a fatha tanween, and you substitute this fatha tanween into a simple lengthening sound of a fatha and a alif, and our simple fatha and a alif would always be to 2 lengths long, so that allows mad al-iwad to be put into practice. A few things to note with mad al-iwad as a side point. There are 2 different types of the letter da which we have in Arabic. One, which is one that we've seen when writing the alphabet, looks like this shape, which I'm just writing on the screen now. So you've got your simple shape, which sits on the line, and you've got your 2 dots as expected on top, or you'd have it within the text as shown here. So your letter of da. When da is written in this construction, it looks open. So this is called an open da. An open da. But there's another way to write your da, and that is the shape that you can see on the example that we've got here, where the da comes at the end of the word and it's closed off. You can see this closing off as compared to the one which we saw at the top. This one at the bottom, because it's closed off, it's called da marbuta. Marbuta means tied or closed. So we just need to be aware that there's two types of da, and the one that we're talking about on this page is this closed da or this da marbuta. In this word that we've got here, malaikatan, we have a word and we have a fi'l at the end. So our normal process would allow us or tell us that if we want to stop on this word, it would be an example of mad al-iwad. We substitute that fatha tanween into a single fatha with a alif after it, and we say malaikata. But with a word which ends with da marbuta, there is no mad al-iwad. So it's an exception to the rule. Instead, when stopping on a word with da marbuta at the end, which has a fatha tanween, we change that da into a ha. And what's added onto that ha is a sukoon. So I'll repeat again. Whenever you have a word which you're stopping on, if it has a fatha tanween and that letter is a ta marbuta, you don't put mad al-iwad into place, but instead that ta marbuta changes into a ha. So instead of saying something different, you say malaika, malaika. So it's this ha which comes from the bottom of the throat. So it completely changes the letter when stopping on this ta marbuta letter. So that is one of the exceptions to the rule and something to be aware about. Second side point to make is very similar. This time we are ending on a word which has a hamza at the end. So a hamza sometimes can throw people off because it's not got a usual construction, especially when it's written on the line, as you can see here. So again, we have our fatha tanween at the end of the word. We're wanting to stop there. Does hamza fit the rule of mad al-iwad? Yes, it does. There is mad al-iwad when ending on a hamza. So you go from ma'an, where you can hear the normal fatha tanween sound, and you go to ma'a, ma'a. So you have that usual two lengths to which the hamza is elongated to. Again, just for completeness, there is another mad here which we've not covered, and this ala, that sign that you can see, but inshallah we'll be covering that in the next lesson. So as an aside, there is mad al-iwad when ending on a hamza, and that should be put into practice as you can see on the screen here. Next short side point to make. When it comes to the end of an ayah, we need to pay special attention. So you can see the phrase here, kana توابا. So it's the end of Surah Al-Nasr. إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفره إنه كان توابا. إنه كان توابا. So again, we look at the end of the word. It's got a fatha tanween on. So this is a normal example of mad al-iwad. We take one of the fathas away, or we substitute that fatha tanween into a single fatha and an alif, and we say tawwaba, tawwaba. When coming to the end of an ayah, though, there is a tendency to lengthen or extend just because it is the end of a surah or the end of an ayah. Again, it seems like a natural thing to do for tazyin, for beautification, or just because it is the end of an ayah and there's nothing coming after it. Our mind tells us, or from listening to it from others, that there should be some extra elongation there. So sometimes you hear the phrase, إِنَّهُ كَانَ تَوَّابًا, and you hear it elongated to more than two lengths. But now by going through this, we know it's an example of mad al-iwad. So it should be kept at two lengths long. And you should say, إنه كان توابا. إنه كان توابا. And it stops there at two lengths and no more. It may feel and sound a little bit abrupt or not used to, uh, not being in a way that you're used to with this ayah. But what should be going through your minds? Not what sounds right, but what is right. And we know that what is right is to put mad al-iwad into practice. And so by actually stopping at that two length mark, it should actually give you more confidence that what you're reciting is exactly how it should be recited. So this is one example that we've got at the end of an ayah, but whenever you come to an end of an ayah, always be aware that if there is a rule to put into practice, that rule should be dictating what is done. As well as that, just for this example, sometimes even with that in mind, in that you know that the last sound should be to two lengths long on the ba with mad al-iwad, just before that, you've got the waw with a fatha and a alif. So a simple example of mad al-tabi'i. So now you've got in your mind that you want to keep your mad al-iwad to two lengths long. So your mind tells you something needs to be elongated. So what you hear is some people elongating now the waw beforehand and saying, إِنَّهُ كَانَ تَوَّابًا. So again, we've elongated something because it feels like it should be elongated at the end of an ayah, but that's not what should be being done. We've got an example of mad al-tabi'i. It stays as two lengths, just as the last on the ba is mad al-iwad and stays as two lengths. And again, despite the fact that it sounds abrupt, that should give us more confidence, and it should settle us because we know that the actions and what we are reciting is exactly as it should be. So we'd say, إنه كان توابا. كان توابا. Both to two lengths long, and despite the fact that it's at the end of an ayah, there should be no extra elongation there. So that was mad al-iwad. As we said, a substitution of the fatha tanween when ending on that word to a simple lengthening sound of a fatha and an alif. With a ta marbuta, there's no mad al-iwad, whereas with a hamza there is, and always to pay special attention at the end of an ayah. So with that, we'll go on to our next mad. Our next mad. So we said that with mudud al-asliya, these foundational lengthening sounds, there are four types. And we've been through the four, or we're going through the four now. We've had mad al-tabi'i, mad al-badal, mad al-iwad. And now we're going through our next type, which is as-sila. Mad as-sila combines number four, which is our last in mudud al-asliya, our foundational lengthening sounds, but it also includes number five. So we've got a merging between mudud al-asliya and al-far'iyya, which we'll see in the examples. So the next one, yes, it is number four, but it includes number five conceptually. As-sila means connection, connection. And what we are connecting is the pronoun he to a word. So when using usual speech and in the Quran, there are examples of pronouns referring to people or referring to entities using the pronoun he. The pronoun he, as we'll see on the next slide, can come detached, as in by itself. And you can see here the word huwa, huwa. The word huwa means he. If we take now a particular noun, which we've got on the board here, we've got the word kitab. We know the word kitab means book. So we've got two words. We've got he and we've got book. But if we want to say his book in Arabic, then we can't just say huwa kitabun, because that would mean he is a book. So instead, what you do in Arabic, you don't have two separate words, but this pronoun which we've got, which means he, you take the ha, the first letter, and it gets connected onto the noun, and that allows you to show possession. So you go from kitabun to kitabuhu, kitabuhu. You have that connection, that sila of the ha. That's an example of an attached pronoun and gives you the meaning that you want. And it's this attached ha which we are concerned about now. So it's the attached ha onto a noun which we are concerned about. In this example that we can see here, the ha has a dhamma, but the attached ha, depending on the vowel which comes before it, can either have a dhamma, as you can see here, or it could have a kasra. An attached ha can't have a fatha on, it can only come as these two examples that we've got here. If we're only saying it can have two of the three vowels, then obviously it's only going to be a dhamma and a waw, which we're thinking about, and a kasra and a ya. So just as with mad al-iwad, we only had it on fatha tanween, so it was only with a fatha and a alif. Now we've got the exact opposite. It's only with a dhamma and a kasra, so it's a dhamma and a waw, and a kasra and a ya, which we will have in our minds, which are going to form our mad as-sila. So the attached pronoun of ha can either have a dhamma or a kasra. What we need to keep in mind with mad as-sila, just as we were doing with our rules of an-nun as-sakina and tanween, and our rules of mim as-sakina, that idea of looking at the letter which comes after it. That's what we're going to be doing now with mad as-sila. So whenever you have an example of this attached pronoun, we want to look at the letter after the attached ha. To look at the letter after the attached ha. When you do look at the letter which comes after this attached ha, it will denote one of two types of as-sila. There are two types of as-sila, and we've seen this terminology before. We have as-sughra, as-sila, as-sughra, meaning small, and we have as-sila al-kubra, al-kubra, meaning big. So we've got now as-sila, which means connection, and there are two types, as-sughra and al-kubra, and it's all determined by the letter that comes after this attached ha. So let's see some examples now. We'll start with as-sila as-sughra. As-sila, we said, means the connection of the ha, and what we are denoting by saying as-sughra is that after the ha, this attached ha which we talked about, there is a letter which is not a hamza. There's a letter other than hamza after the ha. So it could be any of those 27 letters which come after the ha. Let's see examples of as-silat as-sughra in practice. So we have here the word innahu, innahu. So we have an example of our attached pronoun. So what do? We look at the letter which comes after the attached pronoun. What letter do we have? We have the letter ayn. We said if it's any letter that's not a hamza, it comes under the category of as-silat as-sughra. With as-silat as-sughra, what happens is the attached pronoun, which would usually just be a single length, gets changed to two lengths by the addition of this small waw on the line. So now we have an example of our harf mad. We have our single vowel with a waw. So it takes this sound from a single length to two lengths long. So you go from innahu to innahu, innahu ala, innahu ala, innahu ala. And again, you'll see this small ha written within the text, but the reason why this little ha here is because you're putting into practice the rule of as-silat as-sughra and elongating this attached pronoun to two lengths because of the fact that there's no hamza after that letter. So again, this is the construction that you'll see within the Quran. The waw will already be there, so it may be something that you're doing naturally, but now you have an understanding of why that rule is there and what type of mad it is with being as-silat as-sughra. So as-silat as-sughra, an attached pronoun, no hamza after. You have this addition of the waw, which makes your lengthening sound. Because there's no hamza, it stays as two lengths, and you say innahu ala, innahu ala, innahu ala. Perfect. So again, just for completeness, we've got another example of mad at-tabi'i here on the second word ala. So again, just as we said, you can have multiple examples of mudud within a short phrase. As we said, with the attached ha, it could either have a dhamma on or it could have a kasra. So again, let's see an example now of when the attached ha has a kasra. So again, with as-sila, we want to look for this attached pronoun we've got here. We look at the letter which comes after the attached pronoun he. We've got the letter jim. It's not a hamza, which is coming after the attached pronoun. So this firstly gets changed to a lengthening sound by the addition, this time, of a ya. There's different ways that you can write ya. We've been used to seeing the ya, as you can see on the top here. I'll just write it on the side. Kind of circular ya, but this is another way that you can write the letter ya. In the addition of this ya here, we have a change of this single vowel now to two lengths long, and the construction of one of our lengthening sounds. So it goes from one length from bihi to bihi, bihi, and we have the phrase bihi jam'an, bihi jam'an, bihi jam'an. So again, attached pronoun as-sila. Look at the letter after. It's not a hamza. So this goes from one length to two lengths. We'll see this ya in the mushaf already. It stays as two lengths, and we say bihi jam'an, bihi jam'an. So that is as-sila as-sughra. Obviously, as-sughra means small, and the reason why it's called small is because this mad is staying at two lengths long. So we saw in the previous example, innahu ala, no change above two, and now bihi jam'an, no change above two. So it stays as our mudud al-asliya, our foundational lengthening sounds, and so it's classed as as-sughra, small, because it's staying as two lengths long. So what happens now if there is a hamza after the sila? We have an example of as-sila al-kubra. As-sila al-kubra, we have a hamza after this attached ha, which we've seen. Let's see some examples of as-sila al-kubra. So again, we're going to do exactly the same thing. We find our attached ha. We've got an attached ha here. Look at the letter which comes after. We have a hamza. So not only are we going to elongate it to two, but something different now is going to happen. Firstly, if we are elongating it to two, our single vowel will have the addition of the waw to take it to two. So we'd go from ma lahu to ma lahu to two lengths. But now that we know that there's a hamza after, what happens? It now gets elongated to more than two, as you can see here. It gets elongated to 4 or 5 lengths. And what you'll see in the mushaf to allow you to know that is this line, this ala, which you can see there. That will be again in the mushaf, and it's to show you that there is a mad which is more than 2 lengths long being put into practice. Again, how do we go to 4 lengths, for example? We take our 2 length sound and we double it, and that's so we get to 4 lengths long. So we go from ma lahu akhlada to ma lahu akhlada to 2 lengths. And then if we're going to go to 4, we double that and we say ma lahu akhlada, ma lahu akhlada. So again, attached pronoun of ha. We look at the letter which comes after, it's a hamza. So we have an example of as-silatul kubra. As-silatul kubra takes this attached pronoun, it adds a waw after, but not only does it add a waw after, we also have this wavy line to denote that it's as-silatul kubra, and it gets extended to 4 or 5 lengths. Because of this extra extension from 2 lengths to now 4 or 5 lengths long, we have the reason why it's called al-kubra. So with as-sughra, it stayed as 2 lengths. Now with al-kubra, because we're going more than 2 lengths, we're going to 4 or 5, it's classed as as-sila, bigger as-sila, as-sila al-kubra. Let's see now an example with a kasra. So again, same kind of idea. we find our attached ha. Look at the letter which comes after. It's a hamza again. So not only do we add a ya in to allow this to go to 2 lengths, but because of the hamza, again, you'll see this wavy line above the ya to show you that this is going to more than 2 lengths. So it goes now to as-sila al-kubra, to 4 or 5 lengths. So it goes from rabbihi ahadan, 1 length, to rabbihi ahadan, 2 lengths, now to 4 or 5, ربه أحدا ربه أحدا ربه أحدا. So again, an example of as-sila al-kubra. As-sila, which is the attached ha. Al-kubra means that it goes to 4 or 5 lengths because of the presence of the hamza after the attached ha. So that is as-sila. As we said, there's 2 types, as-sughra and al-kubra. It all depends on the letter which comes after. If it's a letter other than hamza, it stays as 2 lengths and you won't see the wavy line, but you'll just see the extra waw or the ya. If it is a hamza, not only will you see the waw or the ya after, depending on whether it's a dhamma or a kasra, you'll also see the wavy line on top, and that's to show you it is an example of al-kubra, and that is elongated to 4 or 5 lengths long. With as-sila, there are also a few side points to mention. The ha which we talked about must come between 2 vowels. So if we take the examples we've seen previous, you have the ha here. So what do we see either side of this ha? We have a fatha there, and we have a fatha after. So this ha has come in between 2 vowels. There's a vowel before and there's a vowel after. Next example, again, we had our ha. There's a kasra before and there's a fatha after. So again, the sila of the ha has come between 2 vowels. And that is the point that we're going to make on the next slide. As-sila has to come between 2 vowels. So in this phrase, ما أغنى عنه ماله وما كسب. We have 2 examples of as-sila here. One on the first word and the second on the second word. The second word, the ha, does come between 2 vowels. You have one before, this dhamma on the lam, and you have a fatha on the waw. So this is an example of as-sila as-sughra. We take this ha, which has a single length of a dhamma, elongate it to 2, and in the presence of this waw to denote that, because the letter after is not a hamza. So you'd say maluhu wa ma, maluhu wa ma. However, the one previous to that is also an attached ha. Yes, you do have a fatha after, but before it, you've got a sukun. So there's no vowel before this example of the attached ha. What does that mean? It does not fulfill the requirements for as-sila. So despite the fact that there's a ha there, you don't add an extra waw after because it's not come between 2 vowels. So you don't say anhu maluhu, and elongate it to 2. It stays as 1 length, and you say anhu maluhu wa ma, anhu maluhu wa ma. So the second one is elongated to 2, whereas the first stays as 1 length long. So that's the qaida, the something to have in mind when it comes to as-sila. The ha, the attached ha, which we talked about, must come between 2 vowels. And again, when you're reading the mushaf, you will see the small waw where it's meant to be. If there is a sila there, you will see the small waw or the small ya. If it's got a hamza after, you'll see the ala, the wavy line on top. If there's no as-sila to make, then you won't see the waw or the ya. This is just for our kind of completeness to mention that this is the rule which as-sila has, that it must come between 2 vowels. Saying that, with as-sila, there are also 2 exceptions to the rule in the riwayah which we read, riwayah Hafs and Asim, by the way, of Ash-Shatibiyah. There are 2 exceptions to the rule which we have just mentioned. the first exception to the rule, and I'd advise that you write these references down or so that you can refer to them later. The first one is in Surah Al-Zumar, which is Surah 39, and it is in verse 7. So if we're reading through and we find an example of our attached ha here, firstly, we look at the letter after. It is a lam, so it would come under as-sila as-sughra. Does it fit the criteria? It has a fatha before and it has a fatha after. So it would fit the criteria of as-sila as-sughra. However, this ayah and this word, this phrase, is an exception to the rule. So despite the fact that you should, in theory, put as-sila as-sughra into practice, with this ayah, there is no as-sila put into practice as it is an exception to the rule. So you say, يَرْضَهُ لَكُمْ يَرْضَهُ لَكُمْ وَإِن تَشْكُرُوا يَرْضَهُ لَكُمْ وَإِن تَشْكُرُوا يَرْضَهُ لَكُمْ. So it's an example where you would normally do as-sila, but because it's an exception to the rule, it stays as one length long. And as we said, this example is in Surah Al-Zumar, Surah number 39, verse number 7. The second exception to the rule is, as you can see here on the screen, Surah Al-Furqan, which is Surah 25, verse number 69. And you have the phrase, وَيَخْلُدْ فِيهِ مُهَانًا وَيَخْلُدْ فِيهِ مُهَانًا. So again, we go through the same kind of thing. We find our sila, our attached ha. We look after it. It's got a meme. So again, this would be an example of a mad as-sila as-sughra. You would normally see a ya after, but we need to also look at the vowels before and after. What do we have after? We have a dhamma. Before, what do we have? Do we have a vowel? No, we don't. We have a sukun before. So if we're going through the whole categorization, deciding whether we put the rule of as-sila into practice here, this normally would be an example where we do not put the rule of as-sila into practice because of the fact that it's not coming between two vowels. However, as this is an exception to the rule, with this phrase, you do put the rule of as-sila as-sughra into practice, and this ha is elongated to 2 lengths long, despite the fact that it's not coming between two vowels. So you say the phrase, وَيَخْلُدَ فِيهِ مُهَانًا وَيَخْلُدَ فِيهِ مُهَانًا وَيَخْلُدَ فِيهِ مُهَانًا. So those are the two exceptions to the rules. One where you would normally put it into practice and you don't, and one where you wouldn't normally put into practice, but you do, as we said, Surah Al-Zumar and Surah Al-Furqan as references to those couple of examples. So those are the rules of as-sila. We mentioned the attached ha onto a word. Depending on the letter which comes after the attached ha determines whether it's as-silat al-sughra or as-silat al-kubra. As-silat al-kubra if it is a hamza which comes after that attached ha. And if it is as-silat al-kubra, not only will you see the extension of the vowel with a waw or a ya, but you'll also see the ala, the wave of the line, to denote that that's being elongated to more than 2 lengths, to 4 or 5 lengths long. So that's just saying what we went through. As-silat al-sughra, as-silat al-kubra. As-sughra, the small sila, there's no hamza after the ha, it stays as 2 lengths. Whereas as-silat al-kubra, the big sila, you will find a hamza after the ha, and because there is a hamza, because it's classed as al-kubra, you elongate to 4 or 5 lengths long. So obviously the fact that we've gone to an example now, which is 4 or 5 lengths, we've traversed the barrier from foundational lengthening sounds to supplemental lengthening sounds. The mudud al-asliya, as we said, the strong, stable trunk, which are only 2 lengths long, to now something more than that, these branches which come out, which are identified as mudud al-far'iyya, which we've just stepped into today. So you can see in the table here, how things are identified. You have on the right hand side the foundational lengthening sounds, the ones that we've seen today. Mad al-tabi'i, the naturally occurring mad when there's no effect of a hamza or a sukoon. Mad al-badal, which is an elongated hamza. Mad al-iwad, when you end on a fatha tanween and that gets substituted with a fatha and a alif. And a silat al-sughra, where you have the sila, the attached ha, and it has no hamza after. All of these four come under foundational lengthening sounds, or mudud al-asliya, and they all stay as 2 lengths long. And that's why they're classed as mudud al-asliya. As I said, we've just taken the step into mudud al-far'iyya, these supplemental lengthening sounds. Because they're supplemental, they are 2+ in length. There are 2 reasons why they could become more than 2. It could be because of a hamza, or it could be because of a sukoon. And we've seen the first example of one which changes or becomes more than 2 because of a hamza, and that was as-silat al-kubra. Similar to as-silat al-sughra, you take the attached ha, and if it is a hamza that comes after, you then elongate that sila to 4 or 5 lengths. So this is for our reference that we've just started with our supplemental lengthening sounds. So with the 10, we are halfway, and inshallah ta'ala, we will carry on with the next 5 in the next lesson. We'll just go on to our practice. Unless there's any questions now, then somebody can write it within the chat box. And inshallah, after the practice, our lesson will finish for today. So inshallah ta'ala, we'll start with the practice for today then. As we mentioned, we've been going through Surah Al-Fatiha, and we've come onto one of the middle ayat, which you can see here on the screen. We'll just go through the practice, and then we'll come through to the questions if there are any at the end, inshallah ta'ala. So Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, Ba'da a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. We've got the ayah here, the 6th ayah of Surah Al-Fatiha. So what we're going to do, we'll just go through, as we have been doing previously, what we can pick out from this ayah, common mistakes which are maybe potentially made, and then how we can rectify them, and then we'll practice it at the end. So with the beginning of this ayah, because it starts with a hamzatul wasl, which we may have seen in the previous Arabic lessons which we've completed, we start with a non-original kasra at the end, and we say e to start this word. We add a non-original kasra at the beginning. With this kasra, it's important for it to be, as we mentioned previously, a kasra kamila, a complete kasra, to allow the sound to come through. How do we allow the sound of a kasra to come through? To bring the bottom lip down and to make sure it matches the sound that a kasra should be. So not to get any sound of not to get any sound of e, as in E in English, but to get a complete kasra sound, a kasra kamila, which should sound like E. That E kasra sound gets completely connected to a ha, and this ha comes from the bottom of the throat. One common mistake is reciting this ha higher than what it should be, which similarly resembles the ha which comes from the middle of the throat. So rather than saying you hear the sound So it's a completely different letter that's being changed to, which would completely change the meaning. So we need to make sure that that ha comes from right at the bottom of the throat. As we say when practicing that, if you put your finger on where you can hear the hamza sound coming from, and you say you can feel the reverberation and the vibration within your throat, and that's the same place which this ha should come from. So we have the sound Moving on to the letter dal. Again, a kasra kamila, a complete kasra of that letter dal, and you have the sound di, ihdi. Again, no E sound, so it's not ihda or ehda, but ihdi. Noon with a fatha and a alif, normally that would be elongated to 2 lengths long, but because you're connecting it to the sad after with this shadda shown there, the harf mad, the lengthening sound drops, and you can connect straight from that noon straight to the sad after. So again, complete connection of the noon to the sad, and you say nas, nas. This sad, again, we've not been through the full letters, but it's an example of a full letter. So it needs to have a characteristic of that fullness and not sound like a scene, which would be empty. So not to sound like see, but to have some fullness to it and to sound like see, see. Completely connected to the noon previous, and you have nasi, ihdi nasi, ihdi nasi. Moving on, we have the ra, fatha and a alif. What is this an example of? Simple mad at-tabi'i, where we have no effect of a sukoon or a hamza either side, elongated to 2 lengths long. Again, if we were to elongate that to more than 2 lengths, you'd have as-sirata or as-sirata if it was elongated to less than 2. But now we've been through the mudud, we know that this should be elongated to 2 lengths long and no more. So we have the ra, fatha and a alif, you have that fullness added to it. And lastly, you have the letter ta with a single fatha on. So all together we have ihdina sirata, ihdina sirata, ihdina sirata. Perfect. The ta, just as we had with the noon, is being connected to the lam after, and you have tal, tal. What's important is that the fullness of the letter ta doesn't now linger with the letter lam. So you don't make the lam full and say tal, tal, ihdina as-siratal mustaqim. The fullness stays in the letter ta. The lam is recited empty, and you have the sound tal, tal, tal. So not to bring any fullness to the letter lam. Also, thing to keep in mind with this lam here, it has a sukoon on, so that should be completely closed off. Hearing the sound tal, there should be no qalqala on that sound, no echoing, and not to hear the sound tala, ihdina as-sirata mustaqim, and to have that bouncing or that extra vowel which is added in. Completely close off that lam, so you hear the sound tal, tal. Similar thing, meme with a single dhamma on connected to the scene. Again, similar thing to say, not to have any qalqala on the scene, not to bounce that scene, to hear the sound musa, musa, al-mustaqim. Sometimes you do hear the extra echoing come through. Completely close off the scene, and you'd hear the sound mus, mus, mus. What do we know about the scene? The scene coming from the tip of the tongue, it has the characteristic of al-hams, this khuruj, this expulsion, this release of breath during recitation. And because it's sakina, because it has a sukoon on, it should be increased. So really getting that characteristic coming out. Al-mus, al-mus, and really hearing the scene sound coming through. Next, we have the letter ta. The letter ta comes from the tip of the tongue, the same place as the letter ta, which we had in the word previous. But the letter ta we said was full. This ta at the end is an empty letter. A mistake would be to make this ta full and to say al-mustaqim, al-musta. It should stay empty, and we'd hear the sound ta, al-musta, ta. Last bit, again, we're adding a non-original sukoon at the end to allow us to end on this meme at the end, which we'll inshallah be covering in our mudud al-far'iyya in the next lesson. We close off on the meme and we have the sound qim, qim, qim. So the last word al-mustaqim, al-mustaqim. So again with that kasra and ya, which we've got towards the end, as we come to close with the meme, with any kasra, with any lengthening sound which has a kasra and a ya, we need to really bring that bottom lip down to allow that sound to come through. So that's going through the ayah in completeness. And we'll just recite that ayah through a few times just to see those things in practice. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم اهدنا الصراط المستقيم اهدنا الصراط المستقيم اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. Perfect. So with that, we have had practice of our next ayah of Surah Al-Fatiha. Inshallah, we'll continue with that in the next lesson. We've been through 5 of our mudud, and we've just started with our supplemental lengthening sounds, our mudud al-far'iyah. So inshallah ta'ala, in the next lesson, we will be carrying on with those lengthening sounds next week. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to benefit us with what we've learned and to increase in our knowledge, to allow us to renew our iman. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those who it is said to read and recite, who will traverse and attain the highest ranks in Al-Jannah. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان وزينه في قلوبنا وكره إلينا الكفر والفسوق والعصيان. اللهم اجعلنا من الراشدين. اللهم إنا نسألك الجنة. اللهم أسكننا الفردوس الأعلى من الجنة يا أرحم الراحمين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. سبحانك اللهم وبحمده سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خيرا to you all for joining us. Inshallah, the lessons will be online very shortly. So anybody that wants to go over the rules which we've been through previously can refer to those lessons. And inshallah ta'ala, we'll see you all next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.